Hello, Charlotte. Thank you for joining us. We wanted to make a quick video to talk about the webinar that you will be running, which is supporting parent employees in a COVID world. And it's a webinar for organisations that want to do a bit more. And we plan to offer information, support, guidance to parent employees and their line managers on everything from resilience and communication to avoiding burnout. We felt that this webinar was really important because of some of the data that we had been uncovering when we've been talking to parent employees. So we did a big bit of research in July, which found that 15% of parents either had been made redundant or expected to be made redundant in the future, and that just under half, so 46% of those women said the reason that they were being made redundant was because of childcare issues. They were really clear that that was the reason they were being pushed out. But there was other data that really concerned us, such as 25% of the women we surveyed told us their employers showed them no flexibility at all in managing the homeschool and work-life balance. We did a survey on Instagram after the second lockdown, so in January, and asked mothers how many had felt they either had to leave the workplace or had been pushed out since Christmas. And a shocking 21% of women told us that they had felt they had to leave their jobs. 71% of mothers say that they have been refused furlough by their employers, according to a survey by the TUC. And many were saying that when they were refused furlough, they also weren't given any other options for managing all of their childcare responsibilities. So we really want this webinar to help employers really think about how they can support those parent employees in this current new world that we find ourselves in. And we know that many will think that they're doing a really, really good job. And we know that many are really, really trying to do the best that they can by their employees. But often there will be that disconnect there. And so we hope that this webinar will help them break down those barriers, because we want them to have happy employees. We want them to be retaining their parent employees. And obviously that tends to mean mothers, because it is mothers that are doing the majority of the homeschooling. In fact, we know that for every hour of uninterrupted work done by mothers, fathers are doing 3 hours of uninterrupted work at home. So all of this responsibility does tend to fall on mothers. And so if employees don't do anything about this now, then they're going to lose women from their workforce, really talented, brilliant women. And that is really bad for their business. So with all that in mind, Charlotte, could you tell us what you're hearing from parents at the moment?
It's a really, really mixed bag, and I think there are some definite themes that are coming out, particularly around burnout, as we've already mentioned, and that looking very different for people in the backdrop of a pandemic. You know, burnout's always been there. It's not just because of COVID, but the way that we're dealing with it is very different. I think a lot of parents, and from what I'm picking up from people, is comparison is really becoming an issue, and it's not just scrolling on social media anymore. It's out there in the workplace. People are really struggling with what they can and can't do, and comparing themselves, and knowing that if you've got a counterpart who doesn't have caring responsibilities, then what does that mean when it comes to decision time? It is a very real issue that people are facing at the moment. I think that dealing with the lack of childcare or consistent childcare has been a really, really big thing on people's minds, as we've seen from your own research. But that the changing relationship that parents therefore having with their children, we're not just a parent anymore. A lot of us with school-age children are having to become a version of a teacher. And I don't say that lightly, because I'm absolutely not a teacher in any way, shape or form, but you kind of are taking on that role, even if you're just passing information from a website to your child. It's changing family dynamics like we probably didn't anticipate, and the knock-on impact of that is huge. I'm also hearing that people are having to navigate grief like they never have before. The amount of people that we are losing unexpectedly that we can't say goodbye to, it's having a huge impact. And for people who are returning to work in particular at the moment, we've got mums especially who are grieving a maternity or adoption leave that they expected to have and hasn't happened, and that's having a really big impact on them and their experience going back to work. I think some of the other key things are as well around a fear of judgment. So some people aren't asking for help or asking for furlough because they feel like they're going to get judged, like they can't cope. And what does that mean about me as a person or an employee? And we're having to make choices that we have never had before. And it is impossible to know if you're making the right decision for some of these things about, do I send my child to nursery or should I be keeping them at home? Do I put them with somebody else in the family to look after them so I can get that uninterrupted hour or 2 hours or whatever it might be? Or am I best off keeping them here? There's no rule book for any of it. And of course, there's guidance and everybody wants to stay within the government rules, but it's just not that easy. And I think fundamentally our worlds have shrunk beyond anything that we ever anticipated over the last year. And when that happens, panic, anxiety sets in, we don't know how to make some of these decisions, and fundamentally we're operating from a really, really low base. So our resilience is absolutely shot and our normal resilience boosters aren't available. So I paint a very glamorous picture, but I think fundamentally they're the biggest things that I hear coming out from clients and from organisations who we're already working with.
Yeah. And what are the line managers telling you?
Often that it's they're unsure on how to help. And I think we've got to remember, for line managers, a lot of them are these parents that we're talking about. So you're having to dual hat, you're having to be a line manager, do the best thing by your team, but you're also learning at the same time. You're also the one navigating the homeschooling, the family dynamics changing, the not being able to speak to or see relatives and friends and things. So they're saying that they're struggling. And you can have the best policies in the world, and we can see some brilliant policies from organisations, but if you don't implement them well, and if you don't implement them with heart and with people at the centre of it, all it is a great policy written on a piece of paper. And that's where they're coming unstuck. They can read, they can execute something, but how do you go that one bit further and know what you can and can't say in a really, like, what you've got the autonomy to do, basically, I think is what a lot of people are struggling with. And the fact that they are under the cosh for, you've got to do more with less. And fundamentally, when you say no or say yes to a request or somebody changing their hours, or be that temporary or permanent, there's always going to be a knock on. And of course we want to live in a near perfect world, but that isn't happening. So I think sometimes they feel powerless and don't know what to say and don't know how to respond.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally they also undercore the impact that they have on people. So that can happen in a really positive way, but also it can have such a detrimental impact if they are saying one thing and doing another. I really don't think, and I know it's a sweeping statement, but generally I think line managers really struggle with the enormity of the impact that they can have.
Yeah. And how do you think that disconnect between the two actually occurs?
I think communication in the most old-fashioned sense is definitely a fundamental. People just aren't talking in the same way that they were. We've got Zoom fatigue. People are looking at screens for way longer than they want to. And because people are on from 5:30 in the morning, and then you've got some people on at 10 p.m. at night still, emails are pinging around and we're misinterpreting what people are saying. We're reading things one way and people are saying things very differently. You've also got, the underlying things around bias that are obviously happening in the workplace. So that doesn't go away just because the pandemic has taken centre stage. And we fundamentally have a lot of preconceived ideas and beliefs about people's roles at home and in the workplace. And that is all just exacerbating the issues that we're facing, particularly for women in the pandemic, and what that's done for us, or not done for us. And that's where it's happening, because we're then thinking, well, you perhaps you don't need to have so much of a role at work because you're going to be the one doing the homeschooling. So I won't ask you to get involved in that project or do that, when actually they still want an active role, they still want a voice in the workplace, but we're kind of writing people off, and women in particular off, because well, you're probably going to have other things to, busy yourself with. And I think we need to be having a conversation about how do we manage that imbalance, and how do we help people still have a voice at the table. And I think it goes back to the whole, how can we implement policies well, not just have it on an intranet site. Oh, well, yeah, you can apply to change your hours, but what does that actually mean? Like, what culture have you really got in your organisation to help that happen?
Yeah. And can you tell us a bit about how this webinar that we are talking about will help to address some of those challenges?
So the way that we approach it is that first and foremost, we come in and do some listening. So that tends to be me on the end of the phone chatting with people. We take about 20 minutes, half an hour, and we try and fit in as many as we can over the day to really speak to people and understand what's going on for them. And that's where you start to unearth some of the themes. So particularly around like comparison, for example, is one thing that's come out so loudly. So what I then do is turn that into the so what. How do we do something about that? What's the solution? So it's fine saying yes, the symptom is comparison, but what actually sits underneath that? Well, we need to look at things like defining our own version of success and why that's important, and how do you do that, and how do you have a conversation with somebody about what your definition of success is, because that's not just a nice to do, that's an essential, because otherwise you'll be comparing to other people, you'll be chasing a goal that you don't actually want, and you'll never know when you've achieved where you want to get to. And if your definition of success is to get through the week without crying more than 5 times, without making sure that you've spoken to your team at least 3 times, knowing that you've kind of got food on the table at the end of the day, if that's what success looks like to you, then that's what you need to define. Somebody else's could be so completely different. But if you then get on a team call where they're saying, oh, my child's just got an award through the post for being the best home learner, or if you are wondering, what other people are doing when the minute you look on social media, or like there's an infinite amount of information out there that we need to help people digest a little bit, and that in particular is how we face into some of the comparison side of stuff. But what we do when we've got all of those themes is pull together a bespoke workshop that looks at how do you do some of this stuff? How do you really unpick it in a really practical way? So we do loads of different activities, some of which we do in the webinar, but most of them you can take away and do with your team yourself. So this is the audience that we will talk to are both line managers and parents, and obviously the overlap, because this isn't about saying what are they doing versus us. It's about saying what's the collective conversation that we need to have, and how do we make sure that if your request for furlough is turned down, well, what can we do? What's the art of the possible? Or have you got the role models? Are you sharing people's stories? Are you making sure that, like, how close is that person to burnout? Because it's not just about an occupational context here, it's about what's the impact at home as well. Or how do you make sure that you're managing people's expectations? There's a whole range of topics that we get to cover, because whilst there are lots of themes that will come out and have been very well written about over the last 12 months, every organisation is different, and the way that people handle it is different. And some people are doing brilliant things, so they can come to us at a stage where they've already got a pretty good baseline, but they want to do even more. They want to build on what they're already great at, and that's where things like this can come in, whether you're going from a low base or whether you are wanting to make the most of something that you've already got. It's about making sure that we do the best for you and for your employees.
That's brilliant, thank you. So for anybody watching who's interested in the course, then you just need to get in touch with us at Pregnant Then Screwed, and we will give you any further information that you require. Charlotte is our trainer guru who will be delivering the webinar and also the exploration calls before the webinar takes place as well. All of the profit from these webinars go back into our charity, which is actually called the Motherhood Plan, because the Charities Commission didn't accept Pregnant Then Screwed as an official charity name. I don't know why. And that means that we can carry on delivering our services to support women who face pregnancy and maternity discrimination. So you know that as well as delivering a fantastic webinar, your money's going to something really good as well. Thank you very much for today, Charlotte, and we'll see you all later.
Thank you.